Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Houston, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I would like to welcome you all to Great Falls Forum. The Forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of business, public policy, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This year marks the 27th season of Great Falls Forum. We thank you for your support and ensuring the program's continued success. Today's program is also streaming live via Zoom, and a recording will be available on the library's YouTube page. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. Please mark your calendars for our next Great Falls Forum on March 20th with Penobscot Nation Ambassador Molly and Bryant. At the conclusion of today's program, there will be an opportunity for audience questions. Those in the room are welcome to raise their hands, and those joining us virtually can enter their questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll read these to the speaker. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's featured speakers, former Chief Justice Daniel Wathen and Sun Journal reporter Steve Collins. Former Chief Justice of the Maine's Judicial Supreme Court, Wathen served as a member of Maine's judiciary for more than 25 years. Wathen was first appointed to the Maine Superior Court by Governor Longley in 1977 and served for 4 years before his appointment to Maine's highest court by Governor Brennan in 1981. Wathen was elevated to Chief Justice by Governor McKernan in 1992 and served that role until his retirement in 2001. In 1990, since 1990, Wathen has served as courtmaster to oversee mental health consent decree. A journalist since 1987, Steve Collins has worked for daily newspapers in New York, Connecticut, and Maine. He has served as the State House reporter for the Sun Journal since 2016. Among his awards are the Society of Professional Journalists 2016 Ethics in Journalism Award and the I.F. Stone Whistleblower Award in 2015. Collins is a founder and board president of Youth Journalism International, a charity that teaches students around the globe about news writing, media literacy, and issues of the day. His wife, Jackie Majerus Collins, serves as its executive director. Born in Massachusetts, he grew up in a military family that took him to Norway, Ohio, and Virginia, where he earned a degree in history from the University of Virginia. He and Jackie live in Auburn. They have 2 adult children, 2 colleagues, and not enough time. Please join me in welcoming Daniel and Steve to Lewiston.
Oh, good. Okay, I guess we can get started. So I guess the first question that I have for you is, how did you get involved with this Lewiston Commission at all?
I'm not exactly sure, but I saw the police streaming by in Augusta on the night of in October, and I wondered what was going on. And then, maybe 2 or 3 weeks went by, and it never dawned on me that I might be involved in all of that. And I got a call one day saying, "Would you be willing to serve on a commission if the governor appointed you?" And I've had a lot of public service assignments, and they always began with that question, and I always said yes. I'm not sure why, but I never regretted it. So I said, well, this time I was a little leery, and I said, well, I'd be willing to talk about it. And so I went down and talked to her chief counsel, and I said, yeah, I'll give it a try. And then that night I thought, why did I do that? Because it seemed like it had some really very serious challenges, and it did, but we overcame them, hopefully.
Yeah, so with this thing, I mean, it's created out of whole cloth. It doesn't exist at all. And then all of a sudden, you guys are given this gigantic assignment, really. How do you figure out even how to proceed?
I'm not sure how we did it, but actually we received a lot of help from people in Maine, including at some point the city of Lewiston's government allowed us to use the hall. I mean, in advance you wouldn't say, well, we could use the public hall, or we could go to the University of Maine at Augusta, use their live streaming. If I'd have known about this place, I might have come here, or we might have come here. But it was, it really was one of the more challenging public service assignments I've ever had, because there was nothing. I've done fact finding in court, but you're in an established procedure. You know how you've got a place, you've got a courtroom, you've got staff, you've got an established procedure to follow. Here, you were making it up. I mean, there were, 7 of us were appointed. We were given a laptop and a cell phone, and that was it. And we were left to our own devices. And then, slowly it dawned on me, we're going to have to, in order to make this public, we're going to have something like live streaming. Where do we get that? And I was thinking, couldn't we establish one place where we could do it? And that wasn't possible. But we found that we could shop around and find places as we came to them. And there was no procedure. And then all of a sudden, ideally, before we went too far in this process, we realized, and I was helped by others, that we really had to have ASL interpreters in order to make it available in a meaningful way to the entire public. And so all of those were complications, which in the middle of the night would trouble you, but the next day they worked out fine. And that's the way it went. You never had the feeling. I'm old enough now, so I like to think, okay, when I get up in the morning, I know what I'm going to be doing. And I never had that feeling with this assignment. I thought, wow, I hope this works today. And it did every day. And we had tremendous cooperation from people.
Good. So did you have any hesitation about, I mean, this is it was such a traumatic event. I mean, it was, heartbreaking for so many people here in Lewiston and really the whole state. Did you worry that it was just too much, really?
Not before I agreed, but yes, afterwards I thought, wow, I'm not sure this is going to work and how it will turn out. And I spoke to Ann Jordan, we eventually hired as the executive director. And Ann is a prior prosecutor and commissioner of public safety and has had a long career in Maine law. And I was speaking to her and I said, I'm glad you do this. And she said, well, I really feel like I owe this to Maine. And I thought that's the kind of thing. I've spent most of my, except for 12 years when I was in private practice, the rest of my life I've spent working in jobs in Maine government, in the court system primarily. And I do owe Maine a lot. I'm a county boy from up north, and so I owe the county a lot too. But I owe Maine a lot. Yeah. And so I thought I'll see it through, but I was never confident that it would go well, but it went extremely well. Yeah. From my perspective, at least.
So how did you decide, you ended up holding, a number of public meetings and people would come and talk. And how did you decide all of that? And
well, in truth, Ann and the investigators, which we had Ann Jordan as the executive director. We had Brian McMaster, who was just recently retired as the chief investigator for the Attorney General's office. Very experienced, long history in Maine law enforcement. And we had an investigator, Jim Osrider, who was a retired FBI agent who was in charge of the FBI in Maine during 9/11. So they were both really well versed in all of that. And we had because it's important to realize that this probably wouldn't have worked if Mr. Card had survived and there was to be criminal prosecution, because the police files would never have been turned over to us until after it was completed. But here, since there was no involvement with a trial for him and seemingly no involvement of anyone else, they turned over their files in a series of turnovers to us. And those files consisted of a terabyte of information. I'm not sure what that is, but a terabyte is it's bigger than we can imagine. I don't know how many pages it was, but I know it was a lot. And out of that, we sort of the staff and the commission sort of came to okay, these are groups that we need to talk to, and that's how we set it up. And it came along quite seamlessly. It wasn't difficult. And we started out by talking, because they came forward on their own, to the family of Card and got a lot of background of him. And then we went on to law enforcement and Army and hospital and so on and so forth. Yeah. I think we had 16 hearings in total.
I guess just to clarify for people, what was the mission of the commission? What were you supposed to do?
What we were supposed to do, and hopefully what we did, was to find the facts. And we were not commissioned to delve into questions of policy, gun control, that sort of thing. And if we had been, I don't think I would have agreed to it, because I'm not particularly well versed in all of those things. And it's not my style to be involved in that sort of thing. So we were to find the facts, and the order made it quite clear. The order that came from the governor and the attorney general made it quite clear that we were to find the facts, and the facts regarding the police response, and that with that set of facts, hopefully that would lead to policymakers having a common set of facts that they could rely upon in deciding what the policy should be. And also that knowing what happened, because I think everybody's immediate reaction was, how did this happen? How did this occur? And knowing how this happened step by step could hopefully bring a sense of healing to the Lewiston Auburn community, this area of the state, and actually to the entire state of Maine, because this tragedy shook the confidence of everybody in the state of Maine, I believe. And even I suspect most of you folks, found yourself after that, when you were sitting in a large group, like even at church, you'd think, I wonder what would happen if somebody came through the door. Where would I go, if I was able to? Because that really is what was implanted in here. Yeah. That in a split second, people could be shot, killed. 20 people or 18 people here. I mean, when I first heard this on the news the night that it occurred, I thought that has to be a mistake. It was I think it was like 9 o'clock or so that I was actually at the hospital when that happened, not personally, but there. And I saw it on the news as I walked by, and it said 50 people were killed in Lewiston. I thought, that's got to be a mistake. That can't possibly be. But that incident convinced us all that this could indeed happen, and did indeed happen. And hopefully we now know the basics of why it happened, how it happened.
When you started, did you have any sense of where you were going to end up?
No, none at all, no. And more importantly, none of us, including the staff, had a sense of, because we weren't focused on recommendations, had a sense of what the desired outcome was in terms of what will this produce. It was really a pretty deep simple assignment. And as I've thought about it, I've been asked, I've spoken to a couple of times to legislative committees, some of the questions were, why really didn't you make recommendations? And as I've thought about it, I thought our function was pretty much the same as a jury is in a jury trial, that they're told you're to decide the facts and accept the law as given to you by the judge and not be influenced by what those facts mean.
Yeah.
It's just a simple question of what happened. And so that we never had any discussion about recommendations or anything else. We didn't discuss gun control. I have no idea what the views of the other people are on that, and I don't really have a great idea of my own as to what that is, 'cause I've never really studied it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was find the facts, and those facts hopefully will be useful in producing a sense of healing within the community, and will hopefully be useful to policymakers, and will hopefully be useful to the Army, and so on and so forth. And I believe that they're working in that regard. I think the policymakers are just now beginning to react to it, and I'm really pleased. And I think this is the rewarding part of it. I'm really pleased that they, thus far, knock on wood, I believe that they're operating on a common set of facts that are accepted. There's not misinformation, there's not conspiracy theories. I think people of Maine, because they saw most of this, virtually all of it, if they were interested, I think they wrote their own report long before we wrote our report. And I don't think it differs a great deal from that report. Yeah.
That's actually really interesting, because when this first happened, I mean, there were conspiracy theories all over the place and all kinds of crazy talk, and you don't really hear any of that anymore.
No, and I hesitate to say it because we might start hearing it, but I can't imagine, and I'm sure you folks can't either, how the folks in Sandy Hook must have felt having had their children killed and then watching someone produce millions of dollars out of theories that this was a hoax, that it didn't happen. I mean, you talk about adding injury to injury, I can't imagine anything worse.
Yeah.
So I think that the governor and the attorney general's order consciously reflected the need for a finding of what happened. How did this occur? Answer that question.
Right.
And that was what the commission did, just as we would if we were a jury saying, factually, this is what happened. The consequences are for someone else to decide.
Right. Yeah. So on the second page of your report, so when we were first getting started, you had one page that consisted of just one quote from Danielle Jasper, a survivor, who said, "When there's someone who is a danger to themselves or to the community, do the uncomfortable task and protect us."
Right.
Why did you choose that to sort of highlight the first thing that you brought up?
Well, I think that reflects pretty much everything that the report says. I mean, if you had to condense that, I was thinking of today's event, and I was thinking I was going to have to speak without responding to questions. And I thought, how can I make any sense out of this report? How can I summarize it? I can't. That summarizes it. And if it points to the fact, to me, that for example, the Army, the commanding staff in the Army were unwilling to confront him. I mean, they said they would. They said, well, yeah, we'll get together with him when next battle assembly, but they were unwilling to confront him. And you can look at other other situations here and had the same sort of thing. That there was a need for a face-to-face confrontation with him,
Yeah.
which is the uncomfortable thing.
Mhm.
I mean, I agree that if I had someone that I knew who was experiencing mental difficulties, I'd be reluctant to confront them and say, you know, particularly as in this situation, the friend who drove him back from New York, the fellow Army reservist,
Mhm.
and who went to the casino with him, and when he confronted him and said, "That's not happening. You're imagining those things." He hit him, and that was the end of their friendship. I mean, he couldn't. Yeah. So I mean, you know, it's an uncomfortable thing to do, and it could be
Yeah.
dangerous to do it. But
Yeah.
that summarizes. This lady could have summarized the report before it was written, and I think she did, but that's why it's in there. I think it's a great quote.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
That
mean,
we have to be willing to make human contact. And the other thing, this is a bit of an aside, but it sort of ties in with this unwillingness or inability to make human contact, is the Army Reserves or the Army's psychological or psychiatric health program relies on emails, texts, and cell phone, which often didn't get answered, most of the time didn't get answered. And that's, again, emails and text are wonderful. They had very positive, social media had very positive impacts here, particularly for the deaf community. That was the only way they could even figure out what was going on with regard to their loved ones. So it had very positive things. It had very positive things for the police ability to investigate, but it also had some damaging things. And so it's a poor substitute under certain circumstances for human contact.
Mhm.
Yeah. And to just send an email and say, "We're closing your case," is not very meaningful when you're dealing with someone who is psychotic and in denial about their psychosis.
You said you didn't have any recommendations, but those sort of sound like recommendations for all of us to have to
Well, I better
be courageous and confront things.
I guess I better be careful then. I'll stand by the report. I have nothing to say except what's in the report.
I think most people have a pretty good idea what you reported, but if you had to summarize what you found, how would you do that?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, but I will refer you all to the report. But I think that our basic findings were that the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office had probable cause to invoke the yellow flag law and to set in motion the procedure for seizing firearms. That in fairness, the Army was not as forthcoming with the details and actually downplayed some of the details that were known to them. And the Army, through its command, failed to carry out the instructions that they had been given by both the Army hospital and the civilian hospital that treated Card. Even though they acknowledged that they would do it, they didn't do it. And that the police response, although it was totally utter chaos, as any tragedy of that magnitude would be, was in some respects, in most respects, very commendable. The time frame for the local response by local police officers and sheriff here in Androscoggin County was like 2 minutes. I could give you the exact thing, but it's a matter of 2 to 3 minutes from the time the 911 call came in until they arrived at just in time. And if you stop and think about these incidents, you know, the total from the time Mr. Card, who was totally responsible for this, there's no one else except him who was responsible for it. From the time that he entered just in time until the time that he finished shooting and left Smenges, it's like 15 minutes total, and there's 4 miles of driving in there somewhere. So this thing really came down. He was like a minute in each location, firing a ton of shots and killing the people that we know about and injuring the others. So the police response was almost instantaneous, and you know, basing it on looking at what has happened in some other locations that are notorious, the police responded and went to where they believed the gun was. They went for the gun. There was no hesitation. They went for the gun, and they went to protect the people who had been injured and were laying there in need of the transport to the hospital. And in fact, because there were not enough ambulances, they transported them in vehicles that they had. So that was commendable. The state police established a incident command structure, which is the basic thing that is needed to bring order out of chaos. And they were dealing with 400 plus police officers who had shown up, some dispatched, some self-dispatched, and with not only these 2 incidents, but what turned out to be unfounded claims that there was a shooter at Da Vinci's restaurant, and unfounded claims that there was someone with a gun at the Walmart distribution center, which is, I think, 80,000 square foot. I mean, it's almost sort of like the Pentagon. I mean, if there actually had been shooter or shooters in the Walmart distribution center, you'd have needed the National Guard. I mean, that's a major undertaking. And this was all coming down at one time. So I believe that the response was reasonably good. And to the extent that you could be critical of it, the Maine State Police conducted an after-action report and had a Pennsylvania Police Department conducted a after-action report of the manhunt, and then later the Maine State Police conducted one of the total operation, and that has subsequently been reviewed by another independent state police from another state. So I believe that the state police and law enforcement generally are not trying to hide the problems that were developed in this catastrophe. They recognize the problems, and they're genuine in attempting to deal with them, and I believe they're going about it in the right way. Yeah. I don't know where the question was, but I've lost it.
No, that's good. Let's see if I can make this work. Nope. Yeah. So when you were finished with the report, what questions did you still have? Was there anything that you wished you could have learned more about that you were unable to get to?
No, I didn't have that feeling. For example, I think because the hospital was out of state, which presented certain difficulties in terms of getting access. And also because by the time we were able to determine who we might want to interview, the subpoena power that we'd been given by the legislature had expired. We might have wanted to do more with the New York hospital, but I'm pretty confident that there'll be litigation involving that, and it's appropriate that that's where it is. It's like we were not designed to be the substitute for the policymakers. We were not designed to be the substitute for the court and determine responsibility. So I'm content that we revealed the facts, and I believe that the facts as revealed will be helpful to all parties in litigation, in policy decisions, and so on and so forth. So, and I thought there was another need here as well for doing this in a reasonably prompt way. Because if we took 2 years to decide what happened, no one would care by that time because they would have all come to their own conclusions. And so when we were asked at our first meeting, I've done this several times in my career, you know, how long do you think this will take? And I intuitively, just off the top of my head, I said, well, I'm hopeful we can do it in 6 months. Well, they kept, the media, you folks, kept asking me, are you going to make it? Well, no, it took us 9 months, but that was as close as I think I've ever come. When I was appointed as the courtmaster of the Amhi consent decree, the Amhi consent decree in 2002 or 2003, whenever that was, they asked me, how long do you think this will take? And I said, 3 years. And 20 years later, I just wrapped it up. So I missed quite a bit there, but
They were lucky you were so fast.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, I've forgotten the question, but
So I'm probably not alone in, you know, when you guys were first appointed, of being a little skeptical that this was going to be of use, and you ended up putting out an interim report not too long really after you got started, which kind of like made a lot of us think, wow, you know, you're really on this. Why'd you do that?
well, we were on it, but I think the reason that it was done was because we had asked the legislature to give us subpoena power. They had been a little skeptical about it, and I had gone to the legislature and discussed it with both caucuses and committees. And it became clear to me that the legislature was aware of the fact that, look, if this report is ever going to do us any good, we need to get what you can give us before the legislative session ended. And so I bluntly said, we will try to do that. And if we can, we'll issue an interim report dealing with the question of whether or not there was probable cause. And so that's why we did it. And because if we were ever to do anything that was useful to that session of the legislature, it needed to be done then.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a decision that you made. It's not like you were getting political pressure to do that.
Nobody said it to me. It's like I'm sitting here today. One of the problems with county boards is if you ask them a question, they're likely to answer it. And I answered it to the legislature when I was there in the caucus. I said, well, if we can, we'll try to do an interim report.
Yeah.
And once you say that,
Then you're doing it.
you got to do it. So,
is there anything you would have liked to have had been different about how this was structured or set up, or did it all just work out just exactly the way it should have?
Well, just in terms of my own personal convenience, I would have liked to have seen them. They say, okay, you have the use of a facility for as long as it's needed. You have, you know, this, that, and the other, but no. I think the members of the commission, most of whom I had worked with previously, but with the exception of the psychiatrist and the psychologist, uh, members of the commission were, I don't think could be improved upon. They were, you know, a combination of prosecutorial backgrounds, judicial backgrounds, and psychiatric and psychological backgrounds. And so I think that did it. Um, there was some suggestion publicly that perhaps there should have been more police involvement on it, but I thought that what I did, you know, the governor and attorney general determined who was going to be on the commission, and I thought even if that were true, the people that we selected for the staff positions were made up for that, and we had all that we needed in those two. And the communications director was absolutely essential, because every time we sat down to have a hearing, they had to make sure that the live streaming was working and so on and so forth. And since we were doing it in a number of locations, each time was a brand new game. And I always have the fear. I started doing mediations a few years ago on Zoom. And every time I sit down, I was worried, this may not work today, and you know, what's going to happen? And I had the same feeling when we went in there, and there was always glitches like there was today, and it works it out. Somehow people do it. So no, I didn't think I wasn't in a position where I was asked, but I didn't think that it could have been set up much more so. And I honestly have to admit that my initial impression, which was very initial before I knew much about it, that I thought, I'm not sure you can conduct an investigation in public. And I have to admit that the value of it turned out to be very important, that it was in public. And as we went along, I kept thinking, I'm glad that this is in public rather than hidden, you know, rather than hidden from the public. So,
Good.
yeah.
So did you have a sense, I mean, you must have been following like what news people were getting out of the commission. I mean, did you think it was reasonably accurate and reasonably fair?
Yeah, and in the beginning, you asked, how did we decide to go here, there, and everywhere?
Yeah.
Actually, to some extent, we were guided by what the media was digging up. At the very beginning, the media was really more active and more in producing things, and so they would uncover a particular question, and we would add that to the agenda. It just became pretty natural. I wasn't sure at all what the media response would be to the report. I hoped what it would be, but I wasn't sure. But the coverage after the report and the particularly, well, all coverage, I thought was really quite good, quite positive. For example, the local television each did a segment on the whole operation. And I thought I couldn't hope for better coverage than that. They basically followed the report. There was no major disagreements. And so I think that it was handled well, and the communications aspect of it was handled well, and the media coverage, both written and televised, was supportive, helpful, sometimes additional, But the only negative in the media was at the event itself. And we have a tendency to blame national media for this, but I
I mean,
think
it's all their fault.
yes, the media was trying to get ahead of the police a bit, which always happens, and was interfering to some extent. But that's the police understand that and deal with it. But no, it turned out well as far as
Yeah,
I'm
we
concerned.
were all in the fact-finding business, right?
Yeah, we were all in the fact-finding business, and it was helpful to have you folks there. And we used the media in that regard, and the final conclusion was satisfactory in that, in terms of, do we have a common set of facts that we can agree upon for deciding what should be done? I think we do. Yeah.
So I have to say that this report is, to my mind at least, is unusually well written. I mean, I read a lot of government reports that are really painful to get through. This one was not. How did you pull that off?
Well, it was painful to produce it, let me tell you that. I've never, basically the writing of the report was pretty much the same as writing a opinion in the Supreme Court, where you need 6 other people to agree with you, or at least a majority of them. So it has to be an opinion of all of you. And I've done, I did that for 20 years, so that's not a process that I'm unfamiliar with. But here, we never had in the court system, we never had, a editing sessions where we all sat in the same room. But we spent literally a few hundred hours editing the report. And we spent 2 full days towards the end of it in a facility where we could put the report up on the wall and change it. And we went word for word. And it was the most tedious editing process I have ever been through in my life, and I hope never to go through it again. And we had a bunch of, well, I think everybody there, staff and the commission members, were grammarians as well as everything else. So we had great debates over which and that and so on and so forth. It reminded me of the worst days of English composition, I guess. But which is one of the reasons why I've tried, when I've spoken publicly, and it's not easy to stick to the report, because each word of that report was discussed by all of us until it was finally, and there was a good deal of give and take upon how to express this view. So, yeah.
Well, it was worth it. You came up with one of the better government reports.
Well, that's quite a compliment, Steve. Thank you. No, yeah, and I have to say that the staff contributed a great deal to that. But believe me, every member of the commission took a whack at revising what the initial draft, and we would discuss it, and then we sat down for these 2 days. The interim report, I remember we had like a 9-hour session via Zoom, which was painful, and it ran like until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I didn't have any dinner. I was sitting there. So I thought if we did this way in the Supreme Court, we'd never render an opinion. We'd never get one out. Yeah.
Okay, I see that you want to have some questions, so.
Yep. So if anybody in the room has questions, can we hear that? No.
Chief Justice, Honorable Chief Justice Wathen, I just wanted to publicly thank you and the rest of the commission and everything you've done for Lewiston. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So my name is Bob Staples. I'm from the Brett M. Staples Brain Disorder Awareness Coalition. I'd like to give a possible answer to one of your questions and then ask you a question, if that would be all right with you. First of all, and I apologize, I'm terrible at names, but would you reread that quote that lady said on page 2?
Oh, sure. This is Danielle Jasper. When there is someone who is a danger to themselves or to the community, do the uncomfortable task and protect them.
In the state of Maine, we have a program called the Progressive Treatment Program, which does that. It's set up to keep people in the community working with an assertive community treatment team to help them have success. And that program is not being promoted by the state of Maine. It's a state law that went into effect in 2003, was updated in 2010 to include family members, medical staff, and law enforcement. Law enforcement since 2010 has not made a referral into the program. A lot of that is because the Maine Disability Rights Group believe that anything that is court ordered is against someone's right. They also believe that you have the right to be psychotic. Well, given that, then did Robert Card have the right to go and kill 19 people and others? I'd say 19 because he killed himself. We have something that can work. Today is my son's birthday, or would have been. He would have been 35 today. On August 6th, he was struck by an Amtrak train in Portland. He suffered from schizoaffective disorder. No one had told us about Progressive Treatment Program, a program that would have helped him. He was a danger to himself. When I found out about this, I went out and started talking to law enforcement, medical personnel, talked to about 70 people. Only one had heard a little bit about the program. The state is not promoting this program. It is a program that would help. So my question to you, sir, should the state promote this program?
I'm familiar with the Progressive Treatment Program. In my capacity as court master, I've confronted it several times in AmHigh, or Riverview as it's now called. In my judgment, and it's used very frequently out of hospital. Basically, it's called outpatient treatment. It usually occurs, outpatient commitment, rather. It occurs after someone has been in the hospital, usually for multiple periods of time, and they are released in the community, and it's used often for people who are medication non-compliant, schizophrenics who are non-compliant, and essentially they go out with the order that if they don't take their medication, they'll be recommitted to the hospital. So in this instance, it's hard to imagine how that would have worked in Maine under these circumstances. So I understand that there's an effort to say that that would have cured it, but it was not something that I could accept as being the way this should have happened in this instance. It is a good, valuable thing, and I think the state actually promotes it, uses it. It's not easy to set up because you've got to, in order to make it meaningful, you've got to have the capacity of saying, if you quit taking your medication, you're going back into the psychiatric hospital. So it's difficult to assure that in every instance. And in this instance, it was not based on a series of hospitalizations. Mr. Card's symptoms arose really quite suddenly, and with no prior, he had never been involved in any prior mental health issue. And that's the typically it's used in situations where someone has been hospitalized many, many times and non-compliant falls back in. So I agree, it's a good program. I don't think it's an answer to this situation.
You did say that the state promotes it, but someone from my group called DHHS and they were told we're not allowed to talk about that.
Well, I don't know. I'm not party to those conversations, but I know that it's used very commonly in my experience.
Actually, in the state of Maine, there's
Yeah, well,
The
I,
disability rights group said 75 people total. We have an inordinate large amount
Wow.
of NCRs, not criminally responsible. And
Justice Wathen, thank you. My name is David Chittum. I have a process question for you. I'm curious about how effective, or had you not had the power of subpoena, what is your sense of the cooperation you would have received from the many, many agencies from whom you sought information?
my impression and my belief is that we would have had the cooperation of the local people, because I think everybody in Maine realized that, look, this is a tragic situation. There's no possibility of prosecution occurring. And so we really do need to do that. I mean, the Maine State Police are an example of that. And the sheriff's office was also an example of it. And as I told the legislature when we were discussing whether they would give us subpoena power, I said, I think we will need it with regard to the Army and with regard to the hospital, out-of-state hospital. And if you stop and think about it, it's pretty common in the court system or in litigation generally that if you're an employee and you're working somewhere and you say, I've been asked, they want me to come and testify to something, it's pretty common for the employer to say, well, if you're subpoenaed, go ahead, but don't volunteer. And I think that we would not have, in my judgment, we would not have had the cooperation of the Army without the use of subpoenas. And we would have not have had the access that we had to the medical records and to the medical staff in New York if we didn't have the subpoena power. As I said, it ran out before we interviewed the attending psychiatrist, but we had subpoenaed records prior to that, and we got them from New York. So it was very valuable, and probably under most circumstances, subpoena power would be necessary.
Thank you, sir, and thank you very much for your service on this commission and to the state of Maine. I appreciate it, as we all do.
Thank you. And I'm thankful for all the cooperation that we received here in Lewiston. And I'm thankful to the people, particularly the victims and survivors and family members who came forward and testified publicly about this tragedy, because they made it real. And that was one of the toughest things about my service, and I'm sure the service of everybody else on this, was to hear up front the horror of what these people went through, which none of us can imagine who were not personally involved, and was really, in many respects, more profound than some of the things that I've heard in court, which I guess in court that's the job, but here it was kind of, it was moving. I don't cry in public like most men wouldn't do, but I'll tell you, I choked up a few times during the victims and survivors testimony. This was really tough stuff.
We do have one question online here, and I think we probably got time to take that. And that question is, during your investigation, what was the most surprising thing that you learned?
Well, I guess I would have to say that with the advantage of hindsight, the thing that made this sort of understandable to me was, with the advantage of hindsight, these three areas that were involved, just-in-time, SMENGs, and Maine recycling centers, were not randomly selected. they were targeted because it was clear that Mr. Card associated each of those places with having been called a pedophile by people around. That's what he was hearing. And in fact, at Main Recycling, there may have been some truth to it because people there had inquired and found that there was a Robert Card on the sexual offenders list, but it wasn't him, but they didn't know that. And so it may actually have occurred there, but whether it did or not, he associated in his mind that each of these places, he had been called a pedophile by people there and that they were out to get him. And that was it. And that sort of made the whole thing understandable. I mean, in terms of, given his psychosis, this was a sort of a logical thing, if it was as he believed it to be. And it's really, you know, that mental illness is a terrible thing. And this is a fine example of it. So it's something that we do have to confront. And as the quote says, sometimes we have to do the uncomfortable thing for the protection of all of us and for the protection of this Mr. Card himself. We need to confront. We need to have human contact, and we need to have the professionals in place. And if he could have been hospitalized at an earlier date in Maine, perhaps at some point, outpatient commitment might have been appropriate. It's certainly there and it's used. So this was, in my judgment, less of a systemic failure than a failure of personal failures on down the line. So, and it's been a great time. I've spoken for years, and I really like speaking, but I couldn't imagine how to speak today. I was sitting at home this morning, and I was thinking, how am I going to make sense out of all this? I thought they were going to let me speak for half an hour, 45 minutes. How am I going to make sense out of this? I can't. And then when I got here, I discovered that Steve was going to make this into a conversation, which he's done a great job. And it makes it so much easier. So I thank you for that, Steve.
Thank you.
And this is the only time that I've ever enjoyed having the media sit next to me. So, and I thank all you folks for being here. And I really do thank everybody in the state of Maine for providing this opportunity. It was a rewarding experience in the final analysis, and it's been rewarding all the way down the line. So thank you all, and may we never experience anything like this again. So thank you for coming.